Welcome to a set review of Dominaria United's remarkable new cards. This video will go over the potential applications of some of the new cards in the set for the Modern, Pioneer, Legacy, and Commander formats, with a focus on the competitive Eternal formats. If you're only interested in certain cards, you can use the chapters to jump to specific points in the video. I discuss the cards in alphabetical order except for the Commander exclusive cards, which are at the end. First up, we have the Ally Pain lands being reprinted and thus added to Pioneer: A Darker Wastes, Karplusan Forest, and Sulphurous Springs. Dominaria United is only printing 6 out of the 10 Pain lands, although it's been confirmed that the rest will appear in the following set, the Brothers' War. Pioneer already has a reasonable amount of color fixing, but the addition of the Ally Pain lands does open up new possibilities for certain color combinations. Now we just need the Ally Fast lands. First up after the Ally Pain lands, we have Aether Channeler, a blue 3-mana 2/1 human with, when it enters, choose one of the following: create a 1/1 white bird creature token with flying, return another target non-land permanent to its owner's hand, or draw a card. This is the best version of this effect we've seen so far in the game, and it's a shoo-in in Pioneer Humans decks that are playing blue, either alongside Reflector Mage or replacing it. It's also sure to be an inclusion in Legacy Alurin, where it can replace Baron or Arctic Merfolk in the versions that are playing those cards, since it's better than either of them. Anointed Peacekeeper is a 3-mana 3/3 with Vigilance that says, as it enters the battlefield, look at an opponent's hand, then choose a card name. Spells your opponent's cast with the chosen name cost 2 more to cast. Activated abilities of sources with the chosen name cost 2 more to activate unless they're mana abilities. So Anointed Peacekeeper is a stacks creature for white aggro decks, being a sort of conglomeration between Elite Spellbinder and Sorcerous Spyglass. It's tougher than Spellbinder, though Vigilance is a downgrade from flying. There are a lot of intricacies to the card that aren't immediately apparent. You can name any card, not just one you see in the opponent's hand. The effect applies to every instance of the chosen card name, not just a single card like how Elite Spellbinder functions, and the taxing effect applies only to spells your opponent casts, but the tax on activated abilities applies for both players. This card is a shoo-in for various white aggro decks in Pioneer, specifically Humans and Collected Company decks. My guess is that it supplements Elite Spellbinder rather than replace it. It's also a possible minor addition to Legacy D&T, although taxing creatures besides Thalia and Spirit of the Labyrinth have a high bar to climb. For example, Phyrexian Revoker barely sees play anymore. Astor, Bearer of Blades, is a 4-mana red-white legendary 4/4. When it enters, you look at the top 7 cards, reveal an equipment or vehicle, and put it in your hand. The more relevant text is that it grants Equip for 1 mana to your equipment and Crew 1 to your vehicles. Hammer Time has been on the cusp of playability in Pioneer for a while, but it lacks certain tools. The main combo of Sigarda's Aid and Colossus Hammer are legal, but Urza's Saga, Stoneforge Mystic, and Puresteel Paladin are not. There are some cards that serve similar functions, such as Fighter Class and Open the Armory to tutor equipment, and ways to equip for free, including Resolute Strike for Warriors, Kazul's Toll Collector, and Nahiri, Heir of Ancients, but none of them are great. Astor may be what the deck needs to become competitively viable. Crew 1 also shouldn't be overlooked, as there are some high crew cost vehicles such as Consulate Dreadnought. Balmor, Battlemage Captain, is a blue and red 2-mana 1/3 legend with flying that reads, whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, creatures you control get +1/+0 and gain trample. Balmor is a surefire inclusion in his prowess list, since it's essentially the first prowess lord. Blue-red aggro decks already want to play multiple small creatures and lots of spells, making Balmor a perfect fit for them. Combat Research is a 1-mana blue aura that lets you draw a card whenever the enchanted creature deals combat damage to the opponent. There's some additional text-granting benefits if the creature is legendary, but it's not important. The card is notable for effectively adding 4 more copies of Curious Obsession to the mono-blue Spirits deck in Pioneer, ensuring it'll be even more annoying than it is now, and for possibly reintroducing that deck to Standard, since there are at least 2 to 3 different evasive 1-drops remaining after rotation. Cut Down is a 1-mana black instant that reads, destroy target creature with total power and toughness 5 or less. It's obviously an excellent removal spell for cheap creatures, but Fatal Push is better in Eternal formats. Even in Pioneer, which lacks fetch lands, there are still myriad ways of turning on Push's Revolt, and many creatures have stats that exceed Cut Down's restriction. So while I don't think this spell replaces Push, it could supplement it if a deck wants more than 4 copies. Electrostatic Infantry is a red 2-mana 1/2 with Trample that gets a +1/+1 counter whenever you cast an instant or sorcery. It's reminiscent of Sprite Dragon, although obviously Flying and Haste are better than Trample. On the other hand, being mono red means it can go in more decks than is it prowess, and the additional point of toughness gets out of bolt range faster. Electrostatic Infantry is likely to see play as a supplement to Sprite Dragon in decks playing that card, or in similar prowess or heroic aggro style decks that lack blue mana. Founding the third path is a 2-mana blue enchantment saga with Read Ahead, which means you can start it on any of its chapter abilities. The first chapter lets you cast an instant or sorcery with mana value 1 or 2 from your hand without paying for it, essentially replacing the cost spent to cast Founding. Notably, this is cost 1 or 2, not 2 or less, meaning you can't cheat out the 0-mana suspend sorceries like Crashing Footfalls and Living End. The second chapter mills target player for 4 cards. And the third chapter exiles target instant or sorcery from your graveyard, copies it, and lets you cast the copy, although you still have to pay for it. Founding the third path will be good in spell-based decks, especially those with graveyard synergies. It's notably good in Izzet Phoenix and Pioneer, since the mill chapter can potentially mill over Phoenixes and flashback cards like Galvanic Iteration. It provides fuel for Delve cards, and the third chapter can cast Treasure Cruise. A typical sequence could be to cast Founding on turn 2, playing whatever you were going to play anyway, such as Strategic Planning, milling over 4 on turn 3 and potentially hitting Phoenixes or Cruise, then casting Cruise on turn 4 from your graveyard. I've heard some rumblings from players that have been playtesting with the card that it's the nuts. Inscribed Tablet is a 1-mana artifact that can be sacrificed for 1 mana to reveal your top 5 cards and either put a land among them into your hand and the rest on the bottom, or put those 5 on bottom and draw a card. This card is great in any deck wanting to find specific lands, but in particular, it's great in Tron. Right now, mono-green Tron decks in Modern have a hole in their game plan of around 3 to 4 cards that are usually filled by Relic of Progenitus and/or Dismember. Tablet is yet another card that can be added to the deck to improve the consistency of hitting Tron mana, and it even cycles itself once you already have the lands you need. Ivy, Gleeful Spellthief, is a 2-mana blue and green legendary 2/1 with flying that says, whenever a player casts a spell that targets a single creature besides Ivy, you may copy it and have the copy target Ivy. Importantly, the trigger is optional, so you don't have to kill Ivy if your opponent targets another one of your creatures with removal. Ivy's best applications are copying spells for value, such as targeted cantrips, auras, and mutate creatures. The problem is that red and white are typically the colors that care about doing that sort of thing, see Boros, Aggro, and Feather. So while Ivy definitely has a powerful effect, I don't think there's currently a shell for it. Jhoira, Ageless Innovator, is a 2-mana red and blue 2/3 legend with the following ability. Tap, put 2 Ingenuity counters on Jhoira, then you may put an artifact with mana value X or less from your hand onto the battlefield, where X is the number of counters. The most obvious synergy with Jhoira is Corridor Monitor, since it's a 2-mana artifact that untaps her. Ancestral Statue is a 4-mana artifact that can bounce Monitor, meaning you can activate Jhoira, put in Monitor, untap and activate her again, putting in Statue, bounce Monitor and replay it normally, untapping Jhoira and letting you activate her again to put a 6-mana artifact onto the battlefield on turn 3. The problems with Jhoira are threefold. 1, she has no immediate impact when you play her, you have to untap with her and her toughness is low enough that many removal spells kill her. 2, you need either multiple Corridor Monitors in hand or Monitor plus Statue. And 3, even if you accomplish all of that, you still need a good enough payoff, and there just isn't any worth jumping through those hoops for. Godpharaoh's Statue is probably your best bet, and it's not worth it. Still, Jhoira's ability is powerful enough that she's worth keeping an eye on. Karn's Sylex is a 3-mana legendary artifact that enters tapped. It has 2 abilities. The first is a static ability that says players can't pay life to cast spells or activate non-mana abilities. Some notable cards this shuts off are Fetchlands, Yawgmoth, and Gristlebrand. The second is a sorcery speed activated ability for X mana, which taps and exiles Sylex as part of the cost to destroy all non-land permanents with mana value X or less. While Karn's Sylex could be a stacks piece against certain decks like Yawgmoth, I see its use much more as a card like Pernicious Steed that deals with swarmy aggro decks and any deck looking to build up a significant presence of permanents such as Enchantress. Because it's an artifact, it's tutorable from the sideboard via Karn, the Great Creator, and will probably show up as a 1-of in Pioneer's green ramp deck. Since it exiles itself, you can also keep getting it back with Karn. King Darien, the X is 10, so, and V is 5. King Darien the 48th is a 3-mana green-white 2/3 legendary human that gives your other creatures +1/+1. For 5 mana, you can put a +1 counter on King Darien and create a 1/1 soldier token. Lastly, you can sacrifice him to temporarily give your creature tokens hexproof and indestructible. I initially misread this ability as protecting all your creatures, but no, it's only for tokens, which is pretty bad. The only place for King Darien is as a lord in Pioneer Humans decks, and while his inclusion is possible, other similar lords like Benalish Marshal and General Kudro have seen 0 play. Leaf-Crowned Visionary is a 2-mana double green 1/1 elf that gives other elves +1/+1 and, more importantly, has whenever you cast an elf spell, you may pay a single green mana to draw a card. It's one of a handful of new 2-mana tribal lords, and it, along with the others, are some of the best tribal lords we've ever seen. Not only is it a lord, it gives card advantage, acting as a mini glimpse of nature that combines extremely well with elves' various untap and mana acceleration creatures. It's sure to be included in all elves lists spanning all formats going forward. Whether it returns modern elves from the grave is up in the air, but it's a great addition to the deck since Glimpse of Nature is on the ban list, and it's almost certainly going to become a staple in Legacy elves. Leyline Binding is a 6-mana white enchantment with flash that costs 1 less for each basic land type you control, meaning it can cost as low as 1 mana. When it enters the battlefield, exile target non-land permanent an opponent controls until it leaves, so it's the Domain O-Ring. In Modern, in combination with fetchlands and triomes, you can realistically play it by turn 2 for 1 to 2 mana. Additionally, since it's technically a high mana value card, it can't be hit by Prismatic Ending and it can be run in Cascade decks, although all the current Cascade decks aren't white. This is a decent card as long as you can satisfy the domain requirement. We'll have to wait and see whether it's good enough to see play either in Cascade decks or alongside Prismatic Ending. Liliana of the Veil isn't a new card, but its reprinting in Dominaria United makes it legal in Pioneer. So the big question is whether it's good enough for the format, and if so, which decks it'll go in. Liliana has largely, though not entirely, been dropped from Modern, not even making the top 50 most played non-creature spells in the format anymore, although Modern Horizon has edged out many old staples. I suspect Liliana is good enough to see Pioneer play, and the most logical shell for her is Rakdos Midrange, although that deck is already packed with 3-drops. She could also be part of an as-yet unproven black control deck or the mono-black devotion deck if it ever becomes competitive. Meria, Scholar of Antiquity, is a 3-mana green and red legendary 3/3 with 2 abilities. 1. Tap an untapped non-token artifact you control to add a single green mana, and 2. Tap 2 untapped non-token artifacts you control, exile the top card of your library, you may play it this turn. What's interesting is that we've already seen Meria before when his name was Urza, Lord High Artificer. Each card has the same tap artifact to add mana ability, and each has a card advantage ability that lets you play more cards off the top, although Meria isn't her own infinite mana outlet and you still have to pay for the cards you're playing from the top. Meria is also worse in that her colors don't normally play as well with artifacts as blue does. For example, the Thopter Foundry plus Sword of the Meek combo is in the opposite colors of Meria. Speaking of that combo, Meria can produce infinite Thopters in life, same as Urza, but because her ability specifies tapping non-token artifacts, she can't utilize the Thopters, something I suspect WotC was keenly aware of when designing her. Still, she's too good not to see play, if not now, then eventually. Rundvelt Hordemaster is the Goblin Lord amongst the 2-mana Tribal Lords. He's a 1/1 that grants +1/+1 to your other goblins and has, whenever he or another goblin you control dies, exile the top card. If it's a goblin creature, you may cast it until the end of your next turn. Rundvelt Hordemaster therefore provides a certain degree of recoupability for your goblins that die to removal or sweepers, but more importantly, it synergizes with sack outlets, especially Skirk Prospector. Rundvelt Hordemaster, like the other new tribal lords, is pretty much guaranteed to become a staple in Modern and Legacy Goblins lists. Silverback Elder is a 5-mana green 5/7 creature with, whenever you cast a creature spell, choose one. Destroy target artifact or enchantment. Look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may put a land card from among them onto the battlefield tapped and the rest on the bottom in a random order, or gain 4 life. Because it has 3 green pips, it's a possible inclusion in the Pioneer mono green ramp deck, and it's even very similar to Cavalier of Thorns. However, it's definitely worse than Cavalier of Thorns in a number of ways. The ability doesn't trigger when it enters, and rather when you cast a creature spell, and the deck doesn't even have that many creature spells to begin with. And the land comes in tapped, and the other cards don't go to the graveyard, which was one of the things that made Cavalier so good since you could put Storm the Festival there. Still, it's a big creature that has a number of other useful effects such as the Naturalize ability and the Gain Life ability against aggro decks. Smash to Dust is a 2-mana red sorcery that's a modal card that has one of the following choices: either destroy target artifact, destroy target creature with Defender, or it deals 1 damage to each creature your opponents control. In this way, it's reminiscent of End the Festivities, except with a shatter effect attached to it. It could see possible play in Legacy. Whether decks already running End the Festivities would rather have this is a question though. I can't think of too many decks that have a lot of X1 creatures and artifacts, although D&T comes to mind. Asunder is a 2-mana green instant that says exile target artifact or enchantment. Additionally, it has a kicker cost of 1 and a black, which, if paid, exiles any non-land permanent instead, not restricted to just artifacts and enchantments. Asunder is notable for 3 reasons. First, exiling is usually better than destroying except for specifically against Karn the Great Creator, making this better than most variations of Naturalize that have been printed so far. Second, because it exiles, it deals with Cauldron Complete. And third, the kicker means that it's never a dead card in matchups where you want to sideboard a Naturalize effect. For example, against blue-white control, you might want an answer to certain cards like Rest in Peace while still being able to deal with the deck's Planeswalkers, which Asunder now provides. Temporary Lockdown is a white 3-mana enchantment that exiles all non-land permanents with mana value 2 or less until it leaves. It's a mass O-ring for small permanents. Temporary Lockdown is a game changer for white control decks, especially in Pioneer. Previously, mini Wraths, that is, board wipes that cost less than 4 mana, only dealt with small creatures and were confined to black and red. Think cards like Anger of the Gods. Temporary Lockdown is in white, which is one of the 2 primary control colors, hits everything, not just creatures, and exiles them. Some notable non-creature permanents that come to mind immediately are Witch's Oven and Aether Vial. This is going to be fantastic against Rakdos, Sack, and Pioneer, but its role isn't just confined to that. It can hit tons of things, including basically every aggro deck, and wrecks any deck relying on many small permanents such as Elves. Killer Engine is an amazing 2-mana creature version of Amulet of Vigor that will immediately go in the Amulet Titan deck and rename it as 8-Mulet Titan. What's that? It's from the Commander set? As I was saying, I don't know why Wizards previews the Commander cards at the same time since it just confuses people. Tolarian Terror is a 7-mana blue 5/5, but not really because its cost is reduced by 1 for each instant and sorcery in your graveyard. It also has Ward 2. Tolarian Terror's applicability in pre-Pioneer formats is dubious since Murktide is just better than it and directly competes with its cost reduction. In Pioneer, the most obvious home is Izzet Phoenix, but that deck isn't interested in it either, and again, delve spells like Treasure Cruise compete with it. Still, since it's able to be a 1-mana 5/5 with quasi-protection, Tolarian Terror is good enough that it could eventually see play somewhere. It's also possibly good enough in Pauper. I don't play Pauper myself, but Pauper players, is this card good enough? Vodalian Hexcatcher is the last of the 2-mana Tribal Lords, and it's a doozy. It's a 1/1 with Flash, gives your other Merfolk +1/+1, and has Sacrifice a Merfolk, counter target non-creature spell unless its controller pays 1. So not only is it a Lord, it also turns your Merfolk into better Curse Catchers and is itself a Flash counterspell. There's not much to say here, it's extremely good and will be a staple in all Merfolk decks going forward. Now we come to the Commander exclusive cards. These are cards printed in Dominaria United's companion Commander decks, which means they're only legal in EDH and Legacy. I didn't find too much to talk about, but there were a few cards worth mentioning. Emperor Mihail II is a new tribal card for Merfolk. It's a 3-mana 3/3 blue legend with a number of abilities. 1. You may look at the top card of your library. 2. You may cast Merfolk spells from the top. And 3. Whenever you cast a Merfolk, you can pay 1 mana to create a 1/1 Merfolk token. Emperor Mihail II is a value card that accrues more creatures and spits out fish to improve the swarmy nature of Merfolk's lords. Although the 3-drop slot is competitive in Legacy Merfolk, I think it warrants a spot. Gerrard's Hourglass is a 1-mana legendary artifact with Flash that has 2 abilities. The first prevents extra turns. The second, and relevant ability, costs 4 mana, taps, and exiles itself to do the following. Return to the battlefield tapped all artifact, creature, enchantment, and land cards in your graveyard that were put there from the battlefield this turn. This card screams combo potential, being reminiscent of Second Sunrise, and is a 1-mana artifact, meaning it's easy to tutor for, including by Urza's Saga. Because it exiled itself, it can also be returned by Karn the Great Creator. I'm not sure where this would go, but it's potentially good with various sacrifice effects, including the Baubles, and maybe a new inclusion in the Legacy Riddler combo deck. Torsten, founder of Benalia, is a green-white 7-mana 7/7 legendary human soldier that, when it enters, reveals your top 7 cards and puts any number of creatures and/or lands among them into your hand. Also, when it dies, you create 7 1/1 soldier tokens. The only reason I mentioned Torsten is because there's a Legacy Soldier Stompy deck that's seen Fringe play in the past, which uses Preeminent Captain to cheat out high mana value soldiers. So, is that deck any good? Varric, Warped Sengir, is a 3-mana white and black 2/2 legend with Flying, Death Touch, and Lifelink. It has, whenever you activate a non-mana ability, if you paid life to activate it, you may pay that much life again to copy the ability. This means that, with Varric out, you can double all your fetch lands and any other abilities that require a life payment. However, beyond fetch lands, I can't think of much that Varric works with. The problem is that Varric is just worse than Tymna, by a lot. lot, although his ability also works well with Tymna, so there's that. And that brings us to the end of the Dominaria United previews. I hope you've enjoyed this first look at the set. I went over all the cards I thought were relevant, but if you think I missed anything, please share your thoughts in the comments. See you next time.